You can do the same thing with, instead of row span where you're going across multiple rows vertically, you can do col span where you're going across multiple columns horizontally.
Just to be clear, there's never too many.
Well,
Yes.
we have to email. We could just leave that Rachel if she could do some work. Right?
Yeah. There's a number of...
Is all of this in the email that you sent out last week?
No, this is new information that I was sending out in an email this week.
Can you change the border, the color
Sure.
of the border?
Sure.
You know, like a red vertical frame.
Mm-hmm. This is getting into CSS a little bit, but we can do that. Oh.
Didn't like it.
Border color. No. Alright, let's...
Does it have to be one of those, you know, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0?
No, well, maybe. We know red works, let's try that. I think purple should work, though. It's one of the common colors. I'm sorry?
Is it looking for the number?
It might be. Let's... Maybe the order of the values also.
Is it border color or just color?
No, I think color equals red would be...
the cells, the background?
Yeah.
Let's find out.
Instead
of the cells, right.
Right. So there is a way to do this. It's an older way to use this. CSS is recommended as the solution, but I will delete the individual letters. Thank you, WordPad. You can set a value of border color equals whatever you want it to be. So in this case, I will go with the hex color, which I mentioned briefly last week.
That's what it was.
Right, that's probably what it's looking for.
You had border colon. You had border colon color.
I did.
Yeah, you did.
No.
That's why.
Right, but see how it is doing it like an outline? Can it do it without the outline? Just the regular, just been border.
Just a border?
Just a border. So
I'm not sure I understand. So you've got a red
Yeah,
border.
the 2 lines.
Yeah,
She's
I know
wondering
that.
if it can just be 1 line
Right.
rather than...
There's 2 elements within this. Within every table, there's cell spacing and cell padding. Cell spacing is the amount between the two. So you've got those little red lines with the 2 pixel gap between them.
Right.
So if you turn off cell spacing, which is by default 2, and you set it to 0,
You have a 0 border.
you're right. Thank you.
there you go.
Then you get rid of that spacing between them. The other element is cell padding, which is how far each element gets pushed away from the edge, which is also very slight, but you can turn that off if you want to. So it's harder to see with text, but the letters are actually pushed up against the edge of this. It's easier to see when you do images within the table cell because you'll see that little gap against the image because it's a straight line. So that's the basics of tables. There's controversy in web design because creating a table for something like this, a chart of information like names and accounts, that's what tables are intended for. But because you can push things flush against each other and you can space them out, it is possible to create an entire web page in tables. And so in fact, Visit Florida is built this way, and let me demonstrate. How did we get AOL on this machine? Somebody going online with AOL in here?
It's on the other one too.
CSS is, and I'll get into CSS in a few minutes, but CSS is the proper way to do things. It separates formatting from structure of the page. And so you create divs of information and units of information like paragraphs, and then you have a separate sheet that styles those for the entire site. Doing things the older way is to put the layout and the structure into the same file. And the problem with doing it that way is not only do you wind up with very complicated code with lots of nested tables inside of each other, but you have trouble modifying the layout of things if you want to change something site-wide. If you have CSS and you have things, if you have the layout defined in just one style sheet, you can just change that, and for the entire site it changes automatically. Whereas this way you would have to go and change the border of every single table across your entire site, which takes a long time. But so you can see here we have a table. We have starting a row, let's put in a TD, let's put another TD, and then within that let's put another table with another row, and then another TD, and then within that another table, another row, another TD, and then another table, and then another table, and then another table. And it starts to get really complicated, but this is how you line up very precise elements. You can use CSS to do this. It's difficult to get CSS when you're getting into really fine points with this exact pixel perfect layouts. You can do it with CSS, but cross-browser support is really difficult to achieve. And so it's always, in web department anyway, it's always the goal that we strive for, and we try to build our sites all CSS. Our multimedia corporate site is built that way. But for client sites, these simply require a level of precision and a level of being identical across all browsers that is just too hard to pull off without tables.
I'm glad you said that.
Yeah. So it's you know, and it's a matter of comfort level for the developer too. If you're building your site and you're the one editing the code, it's up to you how you build it, as long as it works, right? And who cares?
I've tried to build a couple sites in just strict CSS and lay it out that way, and it's been a nightmare. And I'm like, I eventually just revert to using tables in there eventually anyway. So
because I'm sorry, because it's more complex. Our client sites are more complicated. That's why you're saying Miles Media is more set up and structured, so it's easier to do it all.
It's a fairly simple site. The Miles Media site is only, what, 4 pages?
Yeah.
And fairly simple, flash straight across the top, and then a column of information and a sidebar. That's not too complicated of a layout. This is, because you have all of these different elements, you have the outer site, which is 3 table cells. That you've got the main column in the middle, which is one cell of what is that, 800 pixels across or so, and then 2 orange cells on the side that are variable width. We've defined the width of the center cell, we've not defined the width of the others, and so it will stretch as the screen is expanded, the browser is expanded. Then within that you have a row across the top, which is the logo and the trip planner. The trip planner itself is a tiny little table within that. And then you have the main column and the sidebar column are 2 different TDs within that, and then within each one, of course, you have a table row across for the search form, you have a table row across for the tag cloud, you have a table row across for the flash unit, and so on, to get them all precisely fitting together.
When you start to understanding that it's much easier to build it and need it, but when you start straying from strict CSS, and one developer builds the site, and as you said, whatever it takes to get it done, how hard is it though for someone else to come in and pick that back up and make changes?
It varies. It all depends on personal preference and personal skill level, honestly. Even though CSS is the right way to go, there are a lot of developers, and I'm one of them, who are simply more comfortable with tables. We've used them longer. Frankly, they work similarly in all browsers. We know when we create a table what it's going to look like.
Right.
And so the problem with maintaining is not with different skill levels between the developers, it's with the client or whatever is inspiring this change now trying to do something that it wasn't set up to do in the first place. And whether you're doing it with tables or you're doing it with CSS, it's going to be a problem trying to rearrange the page to do something it wasn't set up to do in the first place. You're always modifying it more than you should have to.
Right. Okay, so if there's some CSS and some tables, then any developer should be able to go in and figure out what's going on and make reasonable changes.
Right.